It's actually quite remarkable, right? You end class and people have got the phones out and they're talking and calling somebody and talking to them within seconds, right? Doesn't bother you. Surprises me. I guess I'm lucky that they held off at least that long to do it. Okay, so the point I want to make here is that what we're talking about here is not cell phone towers and cell phones, which you all know quite. Oops. What did I do? I hit a button. Which you all know quite well that they're quite reliable and you do rely on them all the time, and for the most part you can hear people and you succeed when you talk on the cell phone. What we're really talking about here is people. And people are the question. And partly what I want to do is sort of chisel away at Russell's inference to the best explanation here, is to raise some very real and very empirical and very well understood doubts about people's ability to successfully, reliably transmit information with any kind of real fidelity. So here's what I'm going to do. I've got my 5 layers, and I want to just run through quickly. I've got a huge amount of stuff to talk about, but I just want to run through quickly several, real questions or doubts or sort of questions to have about each one of these layers. And the net effect, I think, is that you've got to look at the whole thing and see the accumulation of doubt here and go, look, I just can't make a good, reasonable call about this on the base, given what's happened to this information. And I'll try to get to some of the high points, but we'll see how far I get through this, and maybe we'll get to some of it in the discussion. And I'm also trying to bring as much sort of recent psychological, empirical research to bear on this as I can, because there's a lot of really important work being done these days on the human cognitive system and memory and the way we remember things, the way we retell things, and how it can be easily influenced by social forces and the like. And it seems to me that that's one of the best. It's a very important place where science can contribute to and help us understand ourselves and understand how the same sorts of forces that are at work on us and making us mess things up are going to quite predictably going to be at work on those people and making them mess up or having the same sorts of effects on them. All right, so let me talk about some of those, and I'll move through these one at a time. So alleged witnesses on up to the canonizers. There are a number of serious problems at each of these stages that accumulate to undermine the reasonableness of the resurrection, as I see it. All right, so let's start with the alleged witnesses. Here's something, I apologize for the small font there. I realize now, and I see the depth of this room, that's going to be hard to see. But what this is the Lord's problem. And here's this sort of epiphany maybe I had one morning just thinking about this question. We've got, I was wondering to myself, in general, is there any way for us to assign a reliability rating to humans when they testify to miracles? Because here's a relatively rare event, right? Pretty hard to find, get some reliable data to sort of measure, well, how often do people get it right, and how often do people get it wrong when they say that a miracle happened? And the problem is we don't have that many of the real ones to be able to compare and sort of get a good measure. Well, here's a really rough, and I grant a very thumbnail sketch at it, but here's a stab at it. Lourdes, France, is a spring where the water comes out of the wall, a rocky outcropping. And over 100 years ago, there's a woman who claimed to have seen a vision of the Virgin Mary there. And ever since then, it's become this shrine and this place of pilgrimage for Catholics primarily. In fact, so many of them, there's literally millions and millions of people who go there every year to drink the water and to pray and to commune with God, and many of them with a very explicit, very deliberate purpose of trying to achieve a miracle healing. Well, here's what happens. Out of millions and millions of visitors, maybe by some estimates as many as 8 million visitors over the last century, the Catholic Church has set up a modestly critical, a modestly skeptical panel of people who sit down and look at the alleged miracle claims. And they've officially acknowledged and recognized 67 of them. Now I suspect that if I was to sit down and look at some of those, I'd be a bit more skeptical than that, but I'll be nice and I'll grant, okay, let you have your 67. In fact, I might even be prepared to let you have a few hundred if you like. Because the problem here, the real issue here, is the millions on the denominator. That's the thing that drives this way down, right? And that's how I get that number 0.000033. Very roughly speaking, here's a first pass at a guess about this. In general, when some human says that they've seen a miracle, how likely is it to have actually happened it's exceedingly unlikely. It's orders of magnitude too unlikely for us to accept it when some people say it. And even if you want to jack that number up to, say, 1 in 100, right, instead of my 67 out of 8 million, even if you make it 1 in 100, the number here is very, very small. That means that 99% of the time, people are mistaken, or they're deceived, or they're lying, or they're hallucinating, or there's something. And I'm not going to try to defend any particular thesis here. I'm just saying, generally speaking, humans, and I think you've got to accept this too. I think you've got to acknowledge that people make far more of these claims than can possibly really be happening. Right? YouTube is filled with thousands and thousands of videos and testimonials and blogs and people claiming all the time that there are miraculous events happening. And if nothing else, typically people in one religious sect, say Christians, are going to be quite skeptical of allegations about Islamic miracles or Hindu miracles or some other sort of miracle. So everybody in the room has got a dividing line. You've got a line, and you've got a skepticism line. And you're going to say, well, sure, miracles happen, but not those miracles. These are real ones, those are not. Okay, that's what I'm interested in, is that line. Right? Even if we set it up 1 in 100, my argument's going to succeed. All right, so here's another wrestle about the topic of hallucinations. Let me just tell you quickly about some really interesting, wow, 5 minutes already. Some really important recent research that when you look at human beings, couples for instance, take old couples and when one of them dies, as many as 80% of the remaining surviving widower has an auditory or visual hallucination of the person who died. It turns out it's incredibly common for people to have hallucinations of people who've died recently. In fact, it's so common that when somebody does die, you'd be more surprised to find out that no one did hallucinate it than that someone did. It would be more shocking to find out that nobody had a hallucination. Right? I can give some more examples of that later. Ash effect, I'll skip for now. Supernatural belief threshold, I'll talk about just for a second. And what I've got in mind here is that really what we're talking about are people who are, and this to be blunt, are Iron Age, mostly illiterate, uneducated peasants who don't have the benefit of 2,000 years of scientific inquiry to understand a lot of what's going on in the world that you've got. So a great deal of the world is going to be mysterious and unknown and puzzling to them, and they're going to be much more readily receptive to a supernatural explanation of all sorts of things that they see happen. So their threshold for accepting a supernatural account of some event is going to be much lower. All right. I'll have to skip the gorilla problem, as interesting as that is, for the time being. Okay, so repeater problems. This could also apply to the alleged eyewitnesses. We've got a lot of really interesting data these days about how humans will revise, edit, fabricate memories. You can get people in the lab and you can set up an experiment that will get them to remember something that didn't happen, or you'll get them to change their view and they will conceal that they changed their view. They won't even realize they've done it. They'll tell the story as if they saw that's what they believed all along. And there's all kinds of interesting things happening in psychology now that shows just how organic and unreliable and malleable the human memory is. Confirmation bias is a real problem here. And I think I'm going to get to that question under a larger set of issues. I'm going to press on here. I've used up my time.